The honey dripped golden and slow from the wooden frame, each drop catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the small cabin window. And Flora Lawson wiped the back of her hand across her perspiring forehead as she worked the strainer with practiced patience, knowing that this precious sweetness was all that stood between her and complete destitution in this harsh Colorado territory. Georgetown sat nestled in the mountains at an elevation that made breathing difficult for newcomers and winters brutal for everyone. The year was 1878, and the silver mining boom had transformed the small settlement into a bustling town of nearly 3,000 souls, most of them men seeking fortune in the earth. Flora had come here 2 years ago with her father, a beekeeper by trade who had heard that miners paid good money for honey to sweeten their bitter coffee and cornbread. He had been right about that, but he had not lived long enough to see the business truly flourish. A fall from a rocky outcropping while searching for wildflower meadows had taken him 6 months past, leaving Flora alone with 12 hives, a small cabin on the outskirts of town, and a determination born of necessity. She pressed the comb gently against the mesh, watching the honey collect in the ceramic bowl below. Her hands were sticky, her dress stained with wax, but the work soothed her in a way that nothing else could. The bees were honest creatures. They did not lie or cheat or make promises they could not keep. They simply worked, day after day, gathering sweetness from a world that often seemed to offer mostly bitterness. The sound of hoofbeats made her pause. Visitors were rare out here, a good mile from the main street of Georgetown. She set down the frame and wiped her hands on her apron, moving to the window. A lone rider approached, sitting tall in the saddle despite the weariness that seemed to emanate from both horse and man. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that spoke of weeks on the trail. His clothes were dusty, his hat battered, and he rode with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. Flora stepped out onto the small porch, shading her eyes against the sun. The rider pulled up a respectful distance away and touched the brim of his hat. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice rough with thirst and disuse. "Name is Parker Whitmore. I am looking for a place that sells honey. They told me in town I might find it here." "You found it," Flora said, studying him. His eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds over the peaks. "How much are you needing?" Parker Whitmore swung down from his horse with a fluid motion that suggested strength despite his evident exhaustion. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the sunburn across his cheekbones, the way his shoulders sagged slightly. "Much as you can spare, miss." "I have been on the trail for near about 2 months, eating nothing but hardtack and jerky. A man gets to craving something sweet when all he has known is bitter." Something in his voice, a loneliness that went deeper than physical hunger, made Flora's heart constrict. She knew that feeling, that hollow ache that came from being truly alone in the world. "I can sell you a pint jar," she said. "Or you can come inside and I will give you some fresh bread with honey if you are hungry now." The surprise in his eyes told her that kindness was not something he had encountered much lately. "I would not want to impose, miss. It is no imposition. I was about to eat anyway." This was not entirely true, but something about this worn-down cowboy stirred her compassion. "You can water your horse at the trough there." She went back inside and heard him moving around outside, talking softly to his horse. Flora cut thick slices from the loaf she had baked that morning, then drizzled them generously with the honey she had just strained. She poured 2 cups of water from the pitcher and set them on the small table that served as her dining area, work surface, and desk all at once. When Parker stepped through the door, removing his hat, she gestured to the chair across from her. He sat down slowly, as if unsure this was really happening, and looked at the honey-covered bread with an expression of such genuine longing that Flora had to look away. "Go ahead," she said, sitting down herself. He did not need further encouragement. He picked up the bread and bit into it, and the sound he made was almost painful in its relief. "Lord," he said after swallowing. "Lord, miss, I had forgotten food could taste like this." They ate in silence for a few moments. Flora found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way his hands, though calloused and scarred, held the bread gently. There was something careful about him, something that spoke of a man who had known loss. "You are a long way from anywhere," she said finally. "What brings you to Georgetown?" Parker took a drink of water, then set down the cup. "Work, I hope. I heard they are hiring at some of the mines. I am not a miner by trade, but I can learn. I can do most anything that needs doing, really. I have worked cattle drives, broken horses, mended fences, you name it." "Where do you come from?" "Texas, originally, but I have not been back there in 5 years." His voice carried a weight that suggested a story he was not ready to tell. Flora did not press. She understood about stories too painful to share. "The mines are hiring," she said, "but it is hard work. Dangerous, too. A man died just last week in a collapse at the terrible mine." "All work is dangerous in its way," Parker said, "and I am not afraid of hard. I just need something steady, something to—" He paused, searching for words. "Something to make a life around, I suppose." "You have been drifting," Flora said. It was not a question. "For too long," he admitted. He looked around the cabin, taking in the frames of honeycomb stacked carefully against one wall, the tools of her trade hanging neatly, the simple but clean space. "You have made something here. Something real." "I am trying to," Flora said. "My father and I built this business together. Now I am doing my best to keep it going alone. Your father passed 6 months ago. I am sorry." The simple words held genuine feeling. "My own parents died when I was 17. Yellow fever took them both within a week of each other. I know what it is to be alone in the world." They looked at each other across the small table, two young people who had each learned too early about loss and solitude. The late afternoon light slanted through the window, golden as the honey, and for a moment Flora felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she had thought permanently closed. "You can come back," she said suddenly. "For more bread and honey, I mean. If you are going to be staying in Georgetown." Parker's face, which had been so weary, softened into something approaching hope. "I would like that, Miss Lawson, Flora Lawson, Miss Lawson." He stood, putting his hat back on. "Thank you for the food and the kindness. Both are rarer than gold in my experience." "You are welcome, Mr. Whitmore." "Parker, please. Parker." She walked him to the door. "Good luck with the mines." She watched him ride away, sitting straighter in the saddle now, and felt the loneliness of her cabin more acutely than she had in months. The bees hummed in their hives outside, the honey waited to be jarred and sold, and life stretched ahead of her like an empty road with no clear destination. But something had changed. Something as small and significant as a stranger stopping for honey had reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than grief and determination. The next day was Sunday, and Flora made the walk into Georgetown for church services. She attended more out of habit than faith these days, but it was one of the few times she socialized with other people. The small Presbyterian church was packed, as always, with miners in their cleanest shirts sitting beside shopkeepers and their families. Reverend Thompson preached about perseverance and faith, and Flora let the words wash over her without really listening. After the service, as people gathered outside in the sunshine exchanging news and gossip, Flora saw Parker standing slightly apart from the crowd. He had cleaned up, she noticed. His hair was trimmed, his jaw shaved clean, and he wore a shirt that, while not new, was at least freshly washed. Their eyes met across the churchyard, and he made his way over to her. "Miss Lawson," he said, touching his hat brim. "Good to see you again. Parker, did you find work at the mines?" "I did. Starting tomorrow at the Pelican Mine. The foreman said they needed strong backs more than they needed experience." He hesitated, then added, "I found a room at the boarding house on Rose Street too, so I guess I am a resident of Georgetown now." "Welcome to our little mountain town," Flora said with a small smile. "I hope it treats you well. It already has." The way he looked at her when he said this made her pulse quicken. They talked for a few more minutes, carefully polite conversation about the weather and the town, both of them dancing around the attraction that was already sparking between them. When Flora finally said she needed to get back to check on her hives, Parker offered to walk with her. "It is more than a mile," Flora warned. "I do not mind the walk, unless you would rather go alone." "No," Flora said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I would welcome the company." They set off together, leaving the cluster of townspeople behind. The road climbed steadily, following Clear Creek as it tumbled down from the peaks. The sound of the water was constant, a rushing that spoke of snowmelt and the relentless passage of time. "Tell me about the bees," Parker said as they walked. "I do not know anything about keeping them." Flora found herself talking more than she had in months, explaining the intricacies of hive maintenance, the different flavors of honey depending on what flowers the bees visited, the careful balance of harvesting enough honey without taking so much that the bees could not survive the winter. Parker listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and Flora realized how much she had missed having someone to talk to about her work. When they reached her cabin, the bees were active in the warm afternoon, coming and going from the hive entrances in steady streams. Parker stood at a respectful distance, watching them with fascination. "They do not bother you?" he asked. "Not if you move slowly and stay calm. They can sense fear, I think. Or maybe they just respond to quick movements. Either way, if you are gentle with them, they are generally gentle with you." "Like horses," Parker said. "The best way to work with them is to stay calm and move with intention." "Exactly like that." Parker turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was so openly admiring that Flora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You are remarkable, Miss Lawson. Running this business alone, keeping all these bees, making something good out of grief, that takes strength." "I do not feel strong most days," Flora admitted. "I just do what needs doing." "That is what strength is," Parker said softly, "doing what needs doing even when it is hard. Even when you are alone." They stood there in the afternoon light, the mountains rising all around them, the bees singing their summer song, and Flora felt something bloom inside her chest like a flower opening to the sun. This man, this stranger who had ridden into her life just yesterday, somehow understood her in a way no one else had since her father died. "Would you like to come inside for some coffee?" she asked. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, a pattern established itself. Parker would finish his shift at the mine and walk out to Flora's cabin. Sometimes he would help her with the heavy work of her business, lifting the supers full of honey, repairing the fences that kept bears away from the hives, chopping firewood for her stove. Other times they would simply sit and talk, sharing the stories of their lives in small increments, building trust like bees building comb, cell by careful cell. Flora learned that Parker had left Texas after a woman he had loved married his older brother. The betrayal had sent him wandering, working his way north and west, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He had seen the Pacific Ocean in California, worked silver strikes in Nevada, punched cattle in Wyoming. But the rootless life had worn on him, eroding his spirit until he felt hollow. I woke up one morning in a camp outside Cheyenne. He told her one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and rose. And I realized I could not remember the last time I had felt truly happy. Not just content or distracted, but genuinely happy. And I knew I could not keep living that way, just drifting from place to place with nothing to hold on to. Is that when you came here? Not directly. But I started moving with more purpose, looking for a place that felt like it could be home. Georgetown is the first place that has felt even close. He glanced at her. Though I will admit, it is not so much the town as the company I have found here. Flora's heart beat faster. They had been careful with each other, both of them wary of moving too fast, of risking this fragile thing growing between them. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. She was falling in love with Parker Whitmore, this gentle cowboy with sad eyes and strong hands who had somehow seen past her rough clothes and beastings to the woman beneath. "I am glad you came here," she said quietly. "I did not realize how lonely I was until I stopped being lonely." Parker reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Flora, I know we have not known each other long, and I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a miner living in a boarding house with barely $2 to my name. But I need you to know that you have changed everything for me. Since I met you, I wake up with purpose. I have something to look forward to beyond just getting through another day." "You have given me the same thing," Flora said. "These past months since Papa died, I have just been surviving. But now I feel like I am living again." He raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles gently, his lips warm against her skin. "May I court you properly, Flora Lawson? May I take you to dinner in town and walk you home from church and do all the things a man does when he is trying to win a woman's heart?" "You have already won it," Flora said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But yes, Parker Whitmore, you may court me properly." The kiss that followed was tender and sweet, tasting of honey and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, Flora saw tears in Parker's eyes that matched her own. "Sweeten this bitter loneliness," he whispered against her forehead. "That is all I could think when I tasted your honey that first day. That maybe, just maybe, I had found someone who could sweeten all the bitter years of loneliness." "We can sweeten them together," Flora said, holding him close. "We can build something good together." The courtship that followed was the talk of Georgetown. The lonely bee woman and the cowboy turned miner made an unlikely pair, but anyone who saw them together could not doubt their devotion. Parker was attentive without being overbearing, helping Flora expand her business while respecting her independence. Flora, in turn, brought softness and warmth into Parker's hardscrabble life, packing him lunches to take into the mine and tending his cuts and bruises with salves made from beeswax and herbs. 3 months after their first meeting, Parker came to Flora's cabin on a Sunday afternoon with his hat in his hands and nervousness written all over his face. "I have been saving my wages," he said without preamble. "Every penny I could spare, and I went to see the bank manager this week." Flora set down the frame she had been examining. "What for?" "There is a parcel of land for sale, 5 acres adjoining your property. It has a creek running through it and meadows full of wildflowers, perfect for bees." He took a breath. "I put a deposit down on it." "But Flora, I did not buy it for myself. I bought it thinking it could be for us. If you will have me." Flora's hands flew to her mouth. "Parker, are you asking me to marry you? I know I should wait longer. I know we have only been courting a few months. But Flora, I am 26 years old and I have spent the last 9 years wandering without direction or purpose. I do not want to waste another day. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you talk to your bees like they are your children. I love how you never complain even when the work is hard, and how you laugh at my terrible jokes. I want to build a life with you. I want to help you with your bees and sit with you on the porch when we are old and gray. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep knowing you are near." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Flora Lawson, will you marry me?" The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small garnet, but to Flora it was more beautiful than all the silver in Georgetown's mines. She pulled Parker to his feet and kissed him with all the love and longing in her heart. "Yes," she said between kisses. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They married 6 weeks later in the same small Presbyterian church where they had talked after Parker's first Sunday in Georgetown. Flora wore a dress of pale blue muslin that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Parker wore a new suit bought with his mining wages, his hair slicked back and his face shining with happiness. Half the town turned out for the wedding, curious about the unusual couple, and stayed for the reception where Flora's honey cakes were devoured with enthusiasm. That night, in the cabin that was now theirs together, Parker carried Flora over the threshold and set her down gently. The room was lit with candles, and through the window the summer stars blazed in the clear mountain air. "Hello, wife," Parker said, his voice full of wonder. "Hello, husband," Flora replied, and they both laughed at the strangeness and rightness of the words. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other that went beyond the physical into something transcendent. When Flora woke the next morning with Parker's arm around her waist and the mountain sunlight streaming through the window, she felt a completeness she had not known was possible. This man, who had ridden into her life seeking something sweet to soften his loneliness, had become her whole world. Parker continued working at the mine, but every spare moment was devoted to building their life together. He constructed additional hives, expanding Flora's operation. He cleared the land he had purchased and built a small barn for the horse and the milk cow they bought together. He dug an expanded root cellar and repaired the cabin's roof. Flora, for her part, became not just a beekeeper but a true businesswoman, selling honey not just locally but shipping it to Denver and even as far as Cheyenne. The golden jars with her neat labels became sought after, and prosperity, while not lavish, became steady. Their first winter together was harsh, as all Georgetown winters were. Snow piled higher than the cabin windows, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket by the stove. But inside their small home, there was warmth. They spent the long evenings reading aloud to each other from the few books they owned, playing cards, planning for the spring. Parker would come home from the mine exhausted and frozen, and Flora would have hot food waiting and warm water for washing. She would tend his hands, which were split and bleeding from the brutal work, rubbing them with her beeswax salve until they healed. "I do not know how I survived all those winters alone," Parker said one night as they lay in bed, the quilts piled high against the cold. "Just knowing you are here, that I get to come home to you, it makes everything bearable." "I feel the same," Flora said, snuggling closer to his warmth. "Before you came, I was just existing. Now I am truly alive." Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The wildflowers exploded across the meadows, and Flora's bees went wild with activity, producing honey in quantities they had never seen before. Parker had saved enough money to quit the mine, and he announced one evening in May that he was done with underground work. "I want to be up here with you," he said, "building this business, working in the sunlight instead of the dark. We are making good money with the honey, and I think we could make more if I was here full-time to help. What do you think?" "I think you should have quit months ago," Flora said, throwing her arms around him. I hated you going down in those mines every day. I worried constantly. So Parker became a full-time beekeeper and general partner in the enterprise. Together, they were formidable. Parker's strength and Flora's knowledge combined to create a thriving operation. By the end of their second summer together, they had 20 hives and were selling honey as far east as Kansas City. It was in September of that year that Flora began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited to be sure, and then waited a bit longer, wanting to find the perfect moment to tell Parker. That moment came on a Sunday afternoon as they sat on the porch watching the aspens turn gold against the evergreen slopes. "Parker," she said, taking his hand, "what would you say to building an addition on the cabin?" He looked at the small structure that had sheltered them so well. "I suppose we could use more space. Were you thinking a larger kitchen?" "I was thinking a nursery." It took him a moment, and then his eyes went wide. "Flora, are you saying?" "I am saying that next spring there will be 3 of us instead of 2. Parker let out a whoop of joy that startled the bees and pulled Flora into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Flora asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Parker said, kneeling down to put his hand on her still flat belly. "A child, our child. Flora, I never dared to hope for this much happiness." That winter, Parker threw himself into building the addition with a fervor that sometimes worried Flora. He worked from dawn until after dark, determined to have it finished before the baby came. The nursery took shape, a cozy room with a window facing east to catch the morning sun. Parker built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was silk smooth, wanting everything perfect for their child. Flora spent the winter sewing baby clothes and knitting blankets, her hands always busy. The women of Georgetown, who had initially been skeptical of the independent bee woman, rallied around her now, bringing gifts and advice. She realized that she had built a community here without quite noticing, that she and Parker had become part of the fabric of the town. The baby came in late March during a late snowstorm, just as the first crocuses were pushing through the melting snow. The midwife, Mrs. Chen from the Chinese section of town, attended the birth with calm competence. Parker paced outside the bedroom door, flinching at every sound, until finally the thin wail of a newborn brought him rushing in. "A son," Flora said, exhausted but radiant, holding the tiny bundle. "We have a son." Parker looked down at the red-faced, squalling infant and burst into tears. "He is perfect," he managed to say. "You are perfect. This is all so perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Whitmore after both their fathers. Sam was a good baby as babies went, though he had a powerful set of lungs when he was displeased. Parker took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, walking the floor with Sam at night when he could not sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of such wonder that it made Flora's heart ache with love. "I used to think I had nothing to live for," Parker told her one night as he held Sam, the baby finally sleeping after a fussy evening. "I used to think I would just drift until I died and leave nothing behind. But now look at this. Look at what we have made together. This beautiful boy, this life. I have everything I ever wanted and 100 things I did not even know to want." The years that followed were full and rich. The honey business continued to thrive, and they eventually hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work. Sam grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved the bees and showed no fear of them, much to Flora's delight. They added more land, more hives, and their reputation for producing the finest honey in Colorado grew. When Sam was 3, Flora became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, and she spent the last 2 months mostly in bed, frustrated by her inability to work. Parker took over everything, managing the bees, caring for Sam, running the household, and somehow never making her feel like a burden. "You are growing our child," he said when she apologized for the 100th time. "That is the most important work in the world. Everything else is just details." Their daughter arrived in October, a tiny thing with Flora's dark hair and Parker's gray eyes. They named her Margaret Ruth, called her Maggie from the start. Sam was enchanted with his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. "We made this," Parker said, looking at his children with awe. "We made this whole beautiful family out of nothing but loneliness and a jar of honey." "The best things grow from the smallest beginnings," Flora said, quoting something her father used to say. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons turning and children growing. Sam showed an aptitude for the bees that delighted both his parents, while Maggie had her father's way with animals, gentling the horses, and even the barn cats with her soft hands and softer voice. The cabin, which had started so small, grew with additions and modifications until it was a proper house, comfortable and welcoming. Parker and Flora's love, rather than fading with time and familiarity, seemed only to deepen. They still sat on the porch together on summer evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their days. They still reached for each other in the night, their passion tempered now with tenderness, but no less real. They had learned each other's rhythms and moods, knew when to speak and when to simply be present. When Sam was 12 and Maggie 9, Parker took ill with pneumonia. It hit him hard and fast, and for 3 terrifying weeks, Flora thought she might lose him. She sat by his bedside day and night, spooning broth into him when he could swallow, bathing his fever-heated skin, praying to a God she was not sure she believed in that he would not take this man from her. Sam and Maggie were quiet and scared, sensing their mother's fear. They did the chores without complaint and looked after each other, suddenly seeming older than their years. It was Maggie who suggested putting a small dish of honey by Parker's bed. "Papa always says honey makes everything better," she said. "Maybe it will make him better too." Flora mixed honey with warm water and gave it to Parker a spoonful at a time. Whether it was the honey or the medicine or simply luck, Parker began to improve. The fever broke, his breathing eased and color returned to his face. The first morning he was able to sit up and ask for food, Flora wept with relief. "I am not going anywhere," Parker said, taking her hand. "I have too much to live for. This sweet life we have built, I am not giving it up." He recovered slowly but completely, and the experience changed something in all of them. Life felt more precious, more precarious. They celebrated the small things more, the daily miracles of health and togetherness. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Parker surprised Flora with a gift. It was a book, leather-bound and beautiful, and when she opened it, she found it was a journal he had been writing for years. In it were stories of their life together, memories recorded in Parker's careful handwriting. Their first meeting, the day he proposed, Sam's birth, Maggie's first words. Dozens of small moments that he had thought worth preserving. "I wanted to write it all down," Parker said, "so we would never forget, so they would never forget." He gestured to Sam and Maggie, who were pretending not to listen from across the room. "I want them to know what we built here. How we took 2 lonely people and made a family." Flora read through the journal with tears streaming down her face, reliving their years together through Parker's eyes. That night, they made love with the slow tenderness of long familiarity, and afterward, Flora lay in Parker's arms feeling absolutely complete. "You remember what you said that first day?" she asked. "When you tasted the honey?" "I said a lot of things that first day." You said you wanted something to sweeten your bitter loneliness. Parker tightened his arms around her. And you gave me so much more than sweetness. You gave me purpose, home, love, everything that makes life worth living. We gave it to each other, Flora said. That is what makes it so precious. The years continued their steady march. Sam grew tall and strong, falling in love with a shopkeeper's daughter in Georgetown and eventually marrying her. They built a house on part of the property, and Sam took over much of the honey business, having inherited his mother's knowledge and his father's work ethic. Maggie proved to have a head for numbers and began handling the business side of things, expanding their markets all the way to San Francisco. Parker and Flora, now in their 40s, found themselves with more time than they had had in years. They took up painting together, producing terrible but enthusiastic landscapes of the mountains they loved. They read voraciously, ordering books from Denver. They traveled occasionally, taking the train to visit places they had always wanted to see but had never had time for. But mostly they were content to be at home, surrounded by the life they had built. The bees still hummed in their hives, now tended mostly by Sam but still overseen by Flora. The meadows still bloomed with wildflowers each spring. The mountains still stood eternal around them, and Georgetown below still bustled with silver and commerce. One summer evening when Parker was 48 and Flora 46, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. From the house next door came the sound of Sam's children laughing, their grandchildren now a regular presence in their lives. "You ever think about that day I rode up here?" Parker asked. "How easily it might never have happened. I almost rode right past your place. I was going to go into town first, get settled before I started looking for supplies." "But you did not ride past," Flora said. "No, something pulled me here, fate maybe, or luck, or God, I do not know. But whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." Flora leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and honey and home. "I strained honey from the comb that day, just like any other day. I never imagined a cowboy would ride up and change my entire life. I was so lonely," Parker said quietly, "so tired and bitter and empty, and you filled all those empty places with sweetness. You did the same for me. I was just going through the motions of living. You reminded me what it felt like to truly be alive." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house, Maggie called that dinner was ready. Parker stood and offered Flora his hand, pulling her to her feet with the easy strength that had not entirely left him despite the passing years. "Come on, my love," he said. "Let us go eat with our family." Flora took his hand, as she had done countless times over the past 2 decades, and let him lead her inside. The house was warm and bright, filled with the people they loved most in the world. Maggie had made roast chicken and vegetables from the garden. Sam had brought fresh bread from town. The grandchildren were already seated, 4 of them now, ranging from 8 to 2, all eager to eat. As Flora looked around the table at these faces, this family, she felt a gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was what they had built from nothing but need and hope and a jar of honey. This abundance of love, this richness of connection. Parker caught her eye across the table and smiled, that same smile that had first touched her heart all those years ago. She smiled back, and in that exchange was everything they had been and done and become together. After dinner, after the children had been put to bed, and Maggie had gone home to her own small house on the property, Parker and Flora walked out to look at the hives in the moonlight. It was something they did sometimes, checking on the bees, listening to the soft hum of the hives in the darkness. "They are settling in for the night," Flora said, though she knew Parker knew this already. It was simply something to say, a way of sharing the moment. "You think they are happy?" Parker asked. "The bees? I think they are doing what they were meant to do, working together, making something sweet. Maybe that is happiness for bees and people alike." Parker put his arm around her. "Then I am the happiest man alive. Because I am doing exactly what I was meant to do, with exactly who I was meant to do it with." They stood there together, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting and true. The mountains rose around them, ancient and eternal. The bees hummed their nighttime song. The stars wheeled overhead in their patient dance. And in the center of it all was this love, simple and profound, as golden and enduring as honey. The years that followed brought the usual mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Sam and his wife had another baby, a girl they named Flora after her grandmother. Maggie married a young lawyer from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often and still kept the books for the family business. Parker's hair turned silver, and Flora's dark hair streaked with white. They moved a bit slower, worked a bit less, but their love remained constant. When Parker was 55, he had a heart episode that scared them both badly. The doctor ordered rest and lighter work, and though Parker chafed at the restrictions, he obeyed them. He spent more time playing with the grandchildren, teaching them to whittle and ride and all the skills he had learned in his years as a cowboy. He told them stories of his travels, of the Pacific Ocean and the Wyoming plains and the long road that had led him to their grandmother. Flora, at 53, found her hands growing stiff with arthritis, making the fine work of handling bee frames more difficult. But she adapted, finding ways to continue her work, unwilling to give up the bees that had been her constant companions for so many years. Sam took over more and more of the operation, but Flora still supervised, still tended her beloved hives. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Sam and his family, Maggie and her husband and their new baby, friends from Georgetown and beyond, all came to honor the couple who had built such a solid foundation of love. There was a feast and music and dancing, and though Parker and Flora could not move as they once had, they danced together, holding each other close and moving slowly to the music. 25 years, Flora marveled, a quarter of a century together. "The best years of my life," Parker said. "Every single one of them. Mine too." As the party wound down and the guests departed, Parker and Flora found themselves alone on the porch once more, in the place they had shared so many conversations over the years. The autumn air was crisp, hinting at the winter to come, and the aspens glowed gold in the moonlight. "I have been thinking," Parker said, "about building something." "What kind of something?" "A bench. A nice one, solid and well-made, to put right here on the porch. So when we are too old to stand comfortably, we can still sit together and watch the sunset." Flora laughed softly. "That sounds perfect. Let us have Sam help you. I do not want you overdoing it." "I will be careful," Parker promised. "I have too much to live for to be careless with my health." The bench was built that fall, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship made from local pine and sanded smooth as silk. Parker carved their initials into the back, along with the year they met. It became their favorite spot, that bench, and they spent countless hours there together as the seasons turned. Winter came fierce that year, one of the coldest on record. But the house was snug and warm, and they were prepared with ample supplies. Parker would sit by the fire and read while Flora knitted, and sometimes they would simply be together in comfortable silence, needing no words after so many years of companionship. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, and with it came renewal. The bees emerged from their winter cluster, the flowers bloomed, and the cycle began again. Flora and Parker, now in what they laughingly called their golden years, watched it all with deep satisfaction. They had lived long enough to see their children established and happy, their grandchildren growing, their business thriving beyond anything they had initially imagined. One perfect June day, when Flora was 58 and Parker 60, they took a picnic out to the meadow where the wildflowers grew thickest. It was harder to make the walk now, but they went slowly, arm in arm, taking their time. When they reached the spot, Parker spread a blanket and they sat down carefully, joints protesting but spirits willing. The meadow was alive with bees, thousands of them working the flowers, gathering nectar that would become honey. Flora and Parker watched them, these small creatures that had brought them together and sustained them for so long. "I have had a good life," Parker said suddenly. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens, however long I have, it has all been worth it because of you." "Do not talk like that," Flora said, though she understood. They were both aware of their mortality now in a way they had not been when they were young. "We have years yet. I hope so. But if we do not, I still want you to know. You saved me, Flora. I was a broken man riding aimlessly when I found you. You gave me everything worth having." Flora took his hand. "We saved each other. That is how love works, I think. Two people helping each other become who they were meant to be." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to lower, then made their slow way back home. That night, they made love for what would turn out to be the last time, a tender coming together that was more about closeness than passion, more about connection than desire. Afterward, they held each other in the darkness, grateful for every moment they had been given. Parker lived another 7 years, healthy and active almost to the end. When he finally passed, it was quietly in his sleep, with Flora beside him. He was 67 years old and had been married to Flora for 32 years. Sam found them in the morning, his mother awake and dry-eyed, holding his father's hand. "He is gone," Flora said simply. "He went peacefully." The funeral was large, attended by people from all over the territory who had known Parker or benefited from his kindness. He was buried on a hill overlooking the meadows and the beehives, with a headstone that read simply, "Parker Whitmore, beloved husband and father, he found home." Flora grieved deeply, but without drama. She had known this day would come, had prepared herself as much as anyone can prepare for the loss of their great love. She took comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, in the knowledge that she had been truly loved and had loved truly in return. She lived another 5 years, and they were not unhappy years. She spent time with her family, watched her grandchildren grow, and continued to tend a few hives with Sam's help. She wrote down stories of her life with Parker, adding to the journal he had given her, wanting to preserve every detail for future generations. On a warm summer evening in her 73rd year, Flora sat on the bench Parker had built so many years before. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The bees were humming in their hives, the sound that had been the soundtrack of her life. She thought about that day so long ago when a lonely cowboy had ridden up to her cabin, seeking honey to sweeten his bitter life. She thought about all the years that had followed, the love and work and family that had grown from that single meeting. "I am coming, my love," she said softly to the evening air. "I will be with you soon." They found her the next morning, passed peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. She was buried beside Parker on the hill, under a matching headstone that read, "Flora Whitmore, beloved wife and mother." She gave him home. Sam and Maggie stood at their parents' graves, holding their own children's hands, looking at the two markers side by side. They had something special, Maggie said, tears streaming down her face. Something rare. They did, Sam agreed, but they also worked for it. Every single day they chose to love each other. That is what made it last. Years later, when Sam was an old man himself, he would tell his grandchildren about his parents. He would tell them about the lonely cowboy and the bee woman, about honey and hope, and the way love can transform everything. He would show them the journals, the records of a life well lived and deeply loved. And he would take them to the bench on the porch, now weathered but still solid, and show them the carved initials and tell them this is what love looks like: constant, steady, enduring. The honey business continued for 3 generations, and then 4. The hive still hummed on the property outside Georgetown, and people still bought jars of golden honey, and thought about sweetness and hard work, and the good things that can grow from small beginnings. And sometimes, on summer evenings, if you sat on that old bench on the porch, you could almost feel the presence of 2 people who had loved each other so well, who had taken loneliness and transformed it into joy, who had found in each other everything worth having and built a life that mattered. Their story became a legend in Georgetown, told and retold until it took on the golden haze of myth. But at its heart, it was a simple story. A lonely man seeking something sweet, a lonely woman with honey to share. And from that small beginning, a love that lasted beyond death, beyond memory, into the realm of forever. The meadows still bloomed each spring with wildflowers. The bees still did their ancient work, transforming nectar into honey. And in Georgetown, in the Colorado mountains, people still spoke of Parker and Flora Whitmore, the cowboy and the bee woman, whose love had been as rich and golden as the honey that brought them together, and as enduring as the mountains themselves.